Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Breaking Brews Podcast, a podcast focused on the business side of beer and what's driving today's thriving craft beer industry. Whether you're one of the thousands of people making craft beer what it is today, or just love great beer and want to know more about it, this show is here to cover everything from sales, marketing, branding, culture, and much, much more. The Breaking Brews Podcast delivers real-life scenarios and experiences from industry professionals that will help your beer knowledge evolve. To tap into more great beer content, visit breakingbrews.com today. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. Let's get this session started. All right, boys and girls, gather around. It is time for the official world premiere of the Breaking Brews Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Cercone, and you are strapped in for Session 1 of the brand new show that will air weekly here on breakingbrews.com. Also available wherever you download podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and soon you'll be able to tell Alexa to play the Breaking Brews Podcast. Updates on that coming soon. So before we start today's show, wanted to remind you guys we are at the very beginning of release week. To launch the Breaking Brews Podcast, I am bringing 5 sessions at you in the next 5 days. And for the next 4 days, you're going to get 4 new episodes. And for all of you math majors out there, that's a total of 5 for the week. It's going to be one hell of a week. Hope you guys have your earbuds cleaned off, shined up, and ready to tune in. Now, if you took some time to listen to the introductory episode or took some time to check out breakingbrews.com/podcast over the past couple weeks, you will have discovered that I am doing a special giveaway for release week. To remind you of what's going down with that, I am giving away a $100 Visa gift card to one lucky listener, and with that gift card, I'm hoping that winner will go buy some really kick-ass beer. But again, I can't control what you do with your prize, but I'm still going to give it out anyway. All you need to do to be eligible to win that prize is rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you pick up your podcasts from. By rating and reviewing the show, you're helping me find more listeners for the Breaking Brews Podcast, and I greatly appreciate that. And I'm trying to get this show into the ears of as many beer enthusiasts and beer professionals as I possibly can. So your help is greatly appreciated. Give some honest feedback about the show. Give me a rating. Let me know how things are going. You don't have to do it after today's episode. If you want to take a few episodes to formulate your opinion, by all means, please do so. But step number 1 to win that prize is to rate and review the show. Step number 2 is to share an episode, and you can do that on Twitter or Instagram with the hashtag BBPod, that's BBPOD, and also tag Breaking Brews Co., that's Breaking Brews CO, and you can share any or all of the episodes. It's totally up to you, but share and tell a friend, help more folks find this podcast. If you do those 2 things, you'll be entered to win. Simple as that. All right, without further ado, let's get this show started. Session 1, I sat down with Zack Morrow, who is the co-founder and head brewer at Noble Stein Brewing Company in Indiana, Pennsylvania. And me and Zack talked about some of the do's and don'ts that you want to consider when you're looking to start a brewery. Now, what was great about our conversation is that Zack dropped some great knowledge that also covered information that can be useful to you if you already own a brewery. And it was great to hear his story. Noble Stein has been open for a little over 2 years now. They just recently started packaging their beer, so you're seeing more Noble Stein beer out and about in cans. And they've been doing some wonderful things in Indiana, and we get to hear Zack's story about how he got into beer, how they launched the brewery, and where. If you want to follow Noble Stein online, you can find them on Instagram at Noble Stein. You can find them on Twitter at Noble Stein Beer. They're also on Facebook. Just search Noble Stein Brewing Company. And you can visit their website, noblestein.com, and you will find everything about the brewery, including their tap lists, events they have coming up at the brewery, and events that they are. So I hope you are ready to listen to what Zack has to say. We had a great conversation, and this is officially the first session of the Breaking Brews Podcast. Here we go. So here we are at Noble Stein Brewing with Zack Morrow. Oh, I'm doing fantastic, my friend. Glad to have you on the show. I'm, sexy beard and all. We're going to learn a lot from you today.
Miracle grows the secret.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
We could do a whole episode about this beard, ladies and gentlemen, but we're going to forego that till a future episode, and we're going to talk to Zack about some of the do's and some of the don'ts about opening a brewery. So before we get into that, Zack, why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself and how you got into craft beer and brewing and then ultimately into opening your own brewery, which I should point out is Noble Stein Brewing here in Indiana, Pennsylvania.
Indeed. The day was December 26, 1987.
Down to the day.
That's my birthday, actually. No, I got into craft beer when I turned 21, really, officially, we'll say. My wife, at the time she was my girlfriend, bought me a beer kit for my 21st. And, I was excited about it. I thought it was a really unique gift. What we ended up doing is we had a bunch of friends over right around that time, a couple days later, I think, and we brewed a beer. It was a Canadian ale, whatever that means. And we spent time together. I had probably 5 or 6 friends over. We brewed the beer with very little expectation, probably consumed our fair share that day too. And once it was all said and done, a couple weeks later, we bottled it off. And when we finally went to crack that first beer, it was a little bit nerve-wracking. You're going in, you're about to try what you made, and lo and behold, it was decent. It was a kit beer. That is really kind of what got me hooked. And after that, I continued to brew. I did kits for 3 or 4 more, and then started doing some of my own recipes with a few other guys, with a couple of guys that I started this place with. Further, had been kind of working my palate. A good friend and myself, he used to live in Greenfield in Pittsburgh, and he was very close to a craft beer bar there that had right around 75 taps. So we would frequent that place whenever I'd go visit him. Our shtick was to go look at this menu and pick beers for one another blind. Would do the same for me, and after that, we'd try to figure out what was ordered for us. So it was a lot of fun, actually. It got me thinking and drinking mindfully. And I think that in terms of tasting beer and understanding quality product, that was pivotal for me. That was really pivotal in terms of developing my palate and in terms of helping me learn different beer styles too. So that helped in the long run with designing beers and designing a tap list that's ultimately manifested itself here.
It's great to hear you say that the first batch turned out good, because usually that story is horrific. Most homebrewers on that very first batch say they produced a complete pile of crap, but that's great to hear that yours turned out decent.
Well, and I think it's luck of the draw. I do not give myself any credit in that, but for the record, I do think that we were pretty diligent about keeping things clean, and that was what made it.
Yeah.
Obviously have the privilege of talking with a lot of homebrewers here in our tap room, and you're right. A lot of folks will comment the first beer or the first couple didn't turn out right, and you're at a fork in the road there, because a lot of folks will just give it up altogether.
Certainly.
At that juncture.
Yeah, it's not exactly the cheapest hobby.
Indeed.
Especially if your end product is not to the standard that you've set for yourself. But I think you hit it right on the head. You have to keep trying and getting better at it. It's like anything else.
Absolutely.
So tell us some more about you and your background. What's your business background, and what did you do before you got into the brewing world full time?
Yeah, I grew up here in Indiana, where our tap room is located, and I attended IUP, so I studied finance here. That helped me to build a bit of a business background in terms of knowing really how to plan a business, how to raise money for a business, and ultimately I did work in finance for just about 8 years. So I worked in investment management for a while, and then corporate finance as well. I would say that both of those jobs had elements that have helped me along the way to understand, what's going on with our business from a numbers perspective. And as we were nerding out before the podcast, I developed a very strange affinity for spreadsheets. So if I'm bored, sometimes I'll just open Excel and see what happens, which I'm a real winner. So
yeah, when I got here, Zach had a calculator out and he just hit it real quick like he was hiding a Playboy from his parents.
This is true.
Well, we're going to get into this in a lot more detail, obviously, in this episode because we want to pick your brain a bit about some do's and don'ts that breweries that are, even if they're already opened, if they're looking to realign some practices, this would be some good tips that they can utilize. But for those folks out there that might be pondering getting into this world and starting their own brewery, give us a brief glimpse at the timeline of from, okay, hey, we're going to open this brewery to it's grand opening day. Give us a little bit of an idea of what that looks like. You don't have to go into great detail because we're going to give us a sneak peek.
Right. In terms of, the idea originated, I would say, seriously, late 2013, early 2014. And there was a lot of discussion along that timeline up until when we started construction. So one of the big elements of our process in opening Noble Stein was that we renovated our space ourselves. We took what we had at the time as a pole building and turned it into a fully operating production facility and tap room. So we started construction on the FIS-15, and the project was pretty extensive, as you might glean from going from pole building to production facility. So we did everything from excavating trench drains to bringing in utilities to the building to all the cosmetic work. That being said, we finished construction essentially right before we opened. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of time interruptions, we'll say, built into the August of 15 to October of 16 period by which we renovated and ultimately opened in that October month. So whether it was something with licensing on the state or federal side, whether it was waiting for equipment, kegs, etc., there are a lot of moving parts to that process. So ultimately, not so linear in terms of what was accomplished and when. It wasn't in terms of opening a brewery. I'd be remiss to not mention how, although you should absolutely have your list and sub-list and all of the lists, it's not always going to flow in the timeline that you expect.
Yeah, it's very rare to find a brewery where they set a timeline and it hit 100% accurate. Like I don't know if I've ever had that conversation with someone that's opened a brewery.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have a lot of things that are out of your hands, and sometimes the things that are in your hands even they just take much longer than expected. So, certainly was excited that we got to do all of this work ourselves. I thought that was a privilege. But, there's always, it always felt like, I know, as you said, a lot of our compatriots in this industry will convene, we'll congratulate them on opening, and one of the first questions after that is, how long were you delayed?
Yeah.
And that's reality.
Indeed. So how many square feet is this location?
It's roughly 2,700 square feet. So our capacity, we're rated for just over 50 folks in the tap room, and really one of the limitations of our facility is parking.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about that. I think when we're talking about what I do differently, that'd be one of those things.
Dues have parking.
Have parking.
The leap, and you said we're going to start a brewery, you and your partners. What were some resources that you found, whether it be podcasts, books, reaching out to other breweries, combination of everything? What were some good things that you were able to find that helped you get to where you are today?
Sure. There are two items that come to mind specifically, right off the top of my head, and that the website, so the forums and references on that site. Not only can you find out information regarding setup and equipment and all of that fun stuff, but you can buy things there too. We ended up finding some of our used equipment on ProBrewer. And in addition to that, we used a book called the Brewery Operations Manual. So that was pivotal and pretty self-evident as to what the components of that were. Not to mention, each task kind of had its own resources. So obviously, over time, there were many different written resources that we used for recipe design, a number of references that I resourced on the business planning side. But designing great beers, that's kind of one of the quintessential recipe books. And I've read, I think, every one of Charlie Papazian's books that, although they might have more of a home brewing bent, certainly the fundamentals are absolutely the same in the brewing, in the recipe design and brewing related processes.
Wow, did you know Americans consume an average of 350 slices of pizza every second? That is just freaking nuts. But it shows the United States loves its pie. And with 3 billion pizzas sold nationwide every year, it's a business that isn't going anywhere. If you're an entrepreneur who aspires to build a pizza empire, pick up a copy of The Pizza Equation, a new book by Nick Bogaz, owner of Caliente Pizza and Draft House in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Follow Nick's rise through the corporate pizza landscape all the way up to taking a major leap that has resulted in the locations in less than 7 years. Nick's expertise has gained him accolades from pizza aficionados and industry leaders throughout the world. The Pizza Equation is available on Amazon.com as we speak. Simply jump over to Amazon and search The Pizza Equation and pick up your copy today. So if I'm in the mindset of starting a brewery, what do you feel is the most important thing that I should know right from the start?
I would say that it's the breadth of coverage that you need. And what I mean by that is broad, ironically. Not only do you need to have the ability to produce good beer, and whether that's demonstrated through people around you saying it's great beer, through awards, what have you, you have to have an understanding as to the business side of your brewery. You have to have an understanding for marketing your product. You have to have an understanding for your sales channels. And ultimately, you may expect I have the business bias based on my background, and I would be proud to say that I do. Admittedly, it's, I think, a mistake to go in without heavily considering the math behind things, behind really the finances of the whole project. We are a growing industry still, but we're also getting to a point where the number of breweries is much higher, double what it was just 2-3 years ago. So obviously, even in our industry, when we view each other as friendly competition, it still is competition. Now, by no means am I getting on the topic of bubbles, but the point that I bring up is simply more and more participants in the market mean that you have to be cognizant and you have to be dialed in your operations from a financial perspective. And that's not even talking about the quality of your liquid, which is paramount. So I think that you have to have proper expectations. You have to have proper knowledge on the business side, and you have to have proper expectations as to what all is going to go into running your business.
So how receptive was the Indiana area to your plans to bring a brewery to town?
It was very receptive. We're privileged to have two here in town, us and Levity, right down the road. And we were in planning and in the stages of appearing at the time. So folks in the area were aware of both of us. And interestingly, there's a very avid homebrewer club here in town that had supported us from day zero, practically. Having the opportunity to network with those folks, to participate in events with those folks, put us really in a prime position to be connecting with people outside of that group. The buzz starts early with the people that are really craft beer centric. So they helped our name get out there and proliferate in the community, not to mention the fact that we were appearing at events and sharing our beer there too. We were more than pleased with the reception and really thankful with how it's gone, especially for both of us. And I don't want to speak for the guys at Levity, but I know that there's so much appreciation on our side, and I'm sure theirs too, for the community here and how much they've grabbed on.
Do you think there's still that stigma of, because you hear it before craft beer really hit this massive boom and renaissance that we're living in right now, it seemed as if there were some communities in smaller areas that were not as receptive as Indiana was for you guys. Do you think that's still a thing? Or do you think they're finally starting to realize that this is something that brings people to the area, it creates some jobs, and it's ultimately it's a good thing for the area?
You know,
what are your thoughts on that?
I really like that line of thinking. I think, as you alluded to, it's becoming there's less stigma. The stigma is really, it's almost all but disappeared. Now, I can't speak for all areas, but me, with my background, I really enjoy looking at craft beer through this lens, and I would be shocked if studies would indicate that there isn't a rise in real estate prices, that there isn't an increase in the number of jobs vis-a-vis quality of life increase for areas where breweries come up. I think I've said it before to many folks, but just look at some of the some of the areas around Pittsburgh, like Millvale. We really definitely see more people moving to those areas because there are breweries within walking distance. Now, I think that folks in more rural areas, although it may not have been a shoe-in for people to think, brewery's going to help here, it's not just going to create a bunch of drunks. I think that enough time has elapsed and enough breweries have opened in areas close by that people are really grasping a hold and rethinking and saying to themselves, wait a minute, this is an economic stimulant for sure.
I know I've talked to some brewery owners that had that problem where people said they've come to community meetings and said it's just going to be a bunch of drunks. Now, I have not found a brewery in all of my travels that's open past 11 or 12 on a weekend night.
Sure,
and during the week, usually close early, 9 or 10. And that's the thing. It's not about that drunkenness anymore. It's about sharing a quality product with people and really showing your passion through the liquid that you produce. I think,
Agreed.
Like you said, more communities are starting to see that. That's what the mission is here, and that's what it's all about.
I almost see a lot of similarities between breweries and coffee shops comparative to breweries and bars. Now, you may not see a ton of people doing their homework in here, but it's definitely happened before.
Yeah.
And, I think that there's a certain notion behind a coffee shop as a gathering place, as a center for art, perhaps. A lot of coffee shops around here will display people in the community's artwork. I think that there are more similarities between us and coffee shops sometimes than us in a big party bar.
Yeah, I think when I want to get some thinking done, I'm coming to a brewery. I'm not going to a nightclub.
Right,
exactly. That's usually my mindset. I'm also 39 years old, so there's that.
You could pass for 38.
I could. Technically, as we sit here and record this podcast, I am 38. By the time all of the podcast world is hearing this podcast, I am 39. So we're gonna go with that. I'm an old fart.
Good at that whole carding thing, I guess.
I know. I haven't carded in a long time, bro. This is one of the biggest hurdles you guys ran into when you got the ball rolling in the startup process.
Really, it was the timeline, I would say, and this was just a function of funding, really.
Yeah.
Once you're getting the ball rolling and starting to spend money, that day that you're waiting for is the day that the money starts flowing in the other direction. and certainly I say this with all sincerity and love for producing the beer itself, but there is a limit at which you can extend your finances before you start to make money. So having that waiting period go for as long as it did for us for various reasons, we were in a position where we were definitely hungry for that first month of business, and it worked out. It worked out really well. At the same time, I would encourage people that have aspirations to open a brewery to strongly consider their working capital reserves and understand what that spending is going to be leading up to opening, to ensure that they've got the proper amount, that they're not stressing and waiting. And, that was, again, this is functionally speaking, very apropos for my background. But that being said, I think any small business owner could probably say that same thing if they're waiting to open up. So that was a tough hurdle. I would also say that the one hurdle that we've had and continue to have that I alluded to before is just one of the limitations of our facility, and that's a parking situation. So it's not perfect. We do have parking around the building, but it's not a ton of it. Mm-hmm. So I've found a couple of things, both encouraging and discouraging on the subject. One of the encouraging things, which I think you can attest to, a while back we had our second anniversary party. It was incredibly busy here.
It's a great time.
It definitely, it was awesome. I was very excited.
Yeah.
And thanks again for that cigar.
Hell yeah, man.
I noticed that people they were finding their own parking. And in some ways that's very encouraging. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad.
That's how bad they wanted to be here.
That's exactly right. So that was encouraging for sure. But me being a conscious neighbor to some of the businesses around me and the other property around me, brings up some concerns here and there too. So we've been trying to manage that, whether that be through developing better relationships with our neighbors or neighboring parking lots or areas. So again, that's you live and learn and you manage throughout the life of your business.
Say that no matter what you think your cost is going to be to get started, add maybe 30 to 40% to it, because you're going to come across a ton of different things that you were not expecting. Is that something that you guys would recommend, or that you even encountered personally?
Undoubtedly, you should really be, and I like those guidelines from a theoretical perspective. Really, what that concept is from a business perspective is ensuring you have adequate working capital on top of estimating your costs very conservatively. So it's a kind of a double, a two-pronged approach to financial planning. I think that's incredibly wise, especially sitting on inventory for a little bit before you sell it, in the opening phases, that is. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely encourage people to estimate high like that. I would also, I would be a little bit reluctant to assign figures to it, simply because I think it is a case by case, but I think it's something that you talk about, and you talk about it with your partners, you talk about it with your accountant, you talk about it with a number of people to understand really what are these numbers going to be to the best of my ability, and then what do I need to add to this to ensure that I'm not going to be sitting there pinching pennies by the point where I should really be spending money to make money, so to speak.
So let's shift the gears for a second. What do you feel was one of the greatest accomplishments that you had in this entire process? And that could even be in the last 2+ years that you've been open.
I know that the typical answer is pouring your first beer, and that is certainly atop the list for me. But just to expound upon that, I think it's really been getting our packaged product out there. We started canning beers, and even if it's in small quantities, I think it's just especially meaningful. It's especially tangible to me to see a product like that available now from us, and to see the photos that people post. It's absolutely special to see the photos from the tap room and the photos from bars that we have the privilege of working with. But seeing a picture of our cans, that's pretty special.
So you were a home brewer, as we discussed at the top of the show. Mm-hmm. What were some of the obstacles that you had to overcome when you were making that transition from home brewing to professional brewing?
Tri-clamps. No, in all seriousness, there is absolutely getting used to the whole hose setup.
Damn gasket over there from Brew Day. I remember that one.
Exactly. It takes a certain finesse that sometimes guys like me don't have. But that being said, I do think that there's a lot to pay attention to in the scale-up process. People or brewers are usually finding out about this early on, which is good. You want to be planning ahead and understanding what the differences are going to be from your home brew or even from your small-scale test recipe to your big beer, to your production scale. Mm-hmm. I think that finding opportunities to be using your major brew system on a testing basis, whether that's a water run, whether that's testing efficiencies in other manners, it's really important to be getting that dialed in and to be getting your recipes dialed in at the onset. If I'm being totally candid, it's been observed in this industry that when people start out, things don't always go as smoothly as a brewery that's been open for some time. There are ways to prevent that. There are definitely ways to prevent that. It would be a challenge for any place to ensure that everything's perfect from the get-go. And certainly we're all trying to perfect at all times. But in all honesty, there's a point now where we have so many in our industry that I think we're demanding a higher standard. So, that scale-up process, really don't expect it to be easy and don't expect things to be perfect your first run through. You do have to divorce yourself from the notion of marketing a beer as simply for financial reasons, product itself. And if something's not up to your standard, then don't sell it. Don't try and force it. You have to find a correct scale up there.
So now with this whole process, as we discussed a few minutes ago, you guys just celebrated your 2-year anniversary. With everything from planning, you've got over half a decade of experience in just Noble Stein Brewing alone, not to count all the years of home brewing and everything. So with all of this experience under your belt, I think you can share with us some do's and some don'ts that all people, whether, like I said before, whether it's a brewery that you've been running for several years, had just opened, or if you're in the mindset of wanting to go down that road and start a brewery. Zach's going to drop some knowledge on some things that you should do and some things you should avoid. Definitely. The floor is yours, sir.
Absolutely. I think the first 2 do's that I would encourage folks to pursue are really working in tandem. So the first that I have in my mind is cultivating the right relationships. That goes back to the question you asked about community acceptance here. So I'm talking about the community relationships. I'm talking about your potential bar customer relationships. I'm talking about folks that might do marketing for you, folks that might help you sell your beer. And the list goes on. This is something where if you're not putting yourself out there and if you're not creating a relatable brand and a relatable product, then the chance that you'll find folks to work with later down the road when you may need it, I think becomes harder, especially, again, with our marketplace that's getting more and more participants by the day. That being said, something that works hand in hand with that, cultivating the right relationships, and another hugely important factor is finding the right people to be a part of your business. At Noble Stein, we're blessed with a fantastic group of employees, and this operation would not function without them. They have such a pivotal role, not only in the tasking at hand, but also in building our brand and communicating what we want to communicate here, whether it's from a beer education perspective, from a community relations perspective, or otherwise. I think that's abundantly clear as one of the most important things for a brewery or for any small business for that matter. It's finding folks that are dedicated, that are out and helping for the right reasons. I consider myself to be incredibly lucky to be surrounded by the people that I'm surrounded by. The other big do, which again thematically, we're kind of tying it off by saying this, but it's focus on the liquid. We were privileged to be part of a documentary released back in April called Poured in PA, and the founder of Stouts Brewing Company, that was her focus in every segment of the interviews in that documentary. This focus on the liquid. And she's absolutely right. I take her word as very, very vital and essential to me because she's been around for as long as she has, operating successfully. But certainly my experience would continue to support that concept where people will come in, they'll be recommending to their friends to come in here, not just for the free popcorn, but also for the beer. And
which is a nice touch, I have to say.
I do my best. That's another do. Get a popcorn machine.
Absolutely.
It makes me thirsty just thinking about it.
And you get those butter-flavored IPAs, right? Inside joke.
Indeed.
Please continue.
These pretzels are making me thirsty.
Attaboy.
Some of the don'ts that I would, again, almost reference back to per the conversation we've already had. One is don't expect an easy scale-up. Don't expect things to go really well right away with your brew system. Now, I would consider it to be the exception rather than the rule when it does go really well right out of the gate. But try to prepare yourself the best that you can, obviously. But preparations will, in fact, lead to perfection on batch number one. And I think that, as an aside from that, it's to have a mindset, going back to the do's, it would be have a mindset of being a sponge and being open-minded towards innovation and the community around you. So a couple of other don'ts, one of which, again, is universal to running your own business, is do not expect a regular work schedule. You would think that working in a job that doesn't require on-call type of scenarios, that you wouldn't be thinking about beer at 10:30 on a Tuesday evening unless you're drinking it. But in fact, I have gotten phone calls at very strange times about gift cards and otherwise. But in all seriousness, I do think that when you're starting your own business, you have to be ready to be standing at the bottom of that hill that the proverbial crap rolls down. And you have to be 100% ready for that mentally, physically, and you have to have that commitment to your business. So, that might mean as a brewery owner that you have an employee that's supposed to designate, if that person gets hurt or gets sick, then you might be washing kegs for 12 hours, or you might be doing what you would consider the grunt work because somebody wasn't able to make it through. At the end of the day, I strongly encourage people to be prepared for that and don't come in with any mindset other than being willing and able to do those things. And the other don't that, again, I kind of mentioned at the very beginning in so many other words, I would say don't approach a brewery as a non-business business. You've got to go in with a planning attitude, and you've got to think things through, model things out, and test feasibilities, because although this is a hot industry and although people really enjoy high-quality craft beer, for your expansion, you've got to have cost counting in line. You've got to have all of these things in place to really have things run like a well-oiled machine.
So if you had to do it all over again, would you do anything differently?
There are a couple of things that I would change. First, I would buy all adjoining properties and create massive parking lots. I would probably try to find a location with a little bit more parking and accessible areas nearby. That would be helpful for us, especially regarding foot traffic. Again, I like where we are, and I like what we did with the facility, but that's one of the weaknesses of this area. In terms of other things that I would do differently, admittedly, I would likely have cans earlier. We did release them in time for our 2-year anniversary, and I've been really happy about the reception on those. But I do think that having packaged product out there sooner, which a lot of places have successfully done, is important. And it's nothing but getting your name and your imagery and your brand out there faster. So that's something that I would have prioritized a little bit more differently than we did time frame wise. I will say one of the things that I've observed that's been very interesting about breweries around this area and really across the country is the notion of specialization in particular style or focus on particular style. I really like that business concept. However, I took and gleaned from my investment management background on this one, and I approach our beer production as an opportunity to have diversity and to represent different beer styles, challenge the consumer. Again, this is something that I know you and I have discussed outside of this podcast, but I like to have products that challenge the consumer and bring about different flavor profiles for different palates to try out. So that's something. That's one of the things that I'm seeing. I'm seeing the different models be successful. I'm seeing all of the models, in that sense, be successful in certain instances. So I would say that the aspiring brewer could have some flexibility in what they choose, whether they focus on sours or focus on hazy IPAs or focus on diversity. I think there's room for everybody.
Mm-hmm. All right, my man. Well, thank you for taking some time to share a bit of your story and ultimately provide some great information for folks. Like I said, no matter what stage you are in the game, if you're listening to this podcast, chances are Zack dropped some great nuggets of information today that you can utilize to your advantage.
I've got one thing to add before we
Bring it.
shut it down. And I would feel bad to have not added this. But in terms of the resources that we used, it's fellow brewers. We talk to so many different brewers, so many different owners at different facilities, and it is an absolute miracle how open people are and how willing they are to help out a friend in need, so to speak. So in all fairness and keeping things consistent, if anybody wants to pick my brain, they're welcome to get in touch with me on Facebook.
Excellent. And yeah, you can look up Zack's number here on the phone.
Maybe not.
Okay. But no, I did share all of Noble Stein's information at the top of the show, so you please reach out and follow these guys. They're on all the social networks, the Twitters, the Instagrams, the Facebooks. Check out their website as well, and you can connect with Zack's and all the rest of the crew here and learn a lot. And I think that we are about done here. When do you say we have a beer here to wrap this up?
That sounds like a plan to me.
All right. Well, Zack, thanks again for taking some time, my man.
Cheers.
Cheers. This session of the Breaking Brews Podcast is in the history books. Did you like what you heard? Help the show find the ears of more thirsty beer enthusiasts just like you. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and a rating and review, and share every episode on Twitter and Instagram using the hashtag BBPod. That's BBPOD. Follow Breaking Brews on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube for daily content about your favorite adult beverage, and check out breakingbrews.com/podcast for updates on the show. We'll catch you on the next session of the Breaking Brews Podcast.